Join me in the salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. If you haven't signed the register in the back of the room, we'd appreciate it if you'd do so. Roll call of the board.
Ms. Dawn. Here. Mr. Hernandez. Mr. Jaramillo.
Here.
Ms. Quintero.
Present.
Mr. Crouch.
Present. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I move we approve the agenda as submitted.
Second.
Roll call.
Ms. Dawn.
Yes.
Mr. Jaramillo.
Aye.
Ms. Quintero.
Aye.
Mr. Crouch.
Aye. Next on the agenda is governing board comments. Mr. Jaramillo.
None?
Ms. Quintero.
Yes, yeah, of course. Is there a doubt? I was like, well, I just want to thank Mission Manor school staff, Principal Huey, for allowing the neighborhood to have their game event at Sunnyside in Mission Manor. It was really great. We almost got Superintendent Steve to dance with the kids. Almost. It was so close. It's like, but we did get Captain Strader to dance, so that was a good thing. So it was a real fun event. It was about 150 people there, so it was good. It was a good turnout. So I want to make sure that Mission Manor staff knows we appreciate all the work they did to help us. And also, I wanted to give the deepest condolences to the family of Robin Wiltshire. Wiltshire. Very sad. So sorry. That's it.
Thank you.
Ms. Dawn.
Yes, I also want to give my condolences. I was really saddened to hear that that had occurred. And just give our prayers out to the family. And a couple of real quick things. First of all, just really want to publicly thank and acknowledge all the hard work that the Liberty staff put into the carnival. Once again, for the last 30, 40 years here that I've been part of it, it was a huge success. There was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people there. I mean, just hundreds of people and kids. And we've tried not to change the price for the last 30 years. And I think it's great because everybody gets to have hamburgers and hot dogs. And this time they made some special snow cones with papaya and strawberries. And oh, man, it was delicious. So a lot of hard work went into it. From both the parents, the teachers, and all the staff, and the students. So I just want to acknowledge all of their hard work. And that's it. Good.
And I also want to add my condolences to the loss of the teacher at Graycroft. So I don't have any other comments at this time. Dr. Favela do you have any comments as superintendent?
Well, I'm happy to be here to fill in for Mr. Holmes, and I'll talk a little bit about his activities this evening, that he's doing a very exciting presentation in Nashville, so I'll bring that up, but I'm happy to be here, and hopefully I'll keep it short so we get it to the baseball game.
Okay. We have no recognitions tonight.
No recognition. I'm just going to move the consent agenda as submitted.
Okay. I just want to verify that we don't have any call of the audience. No. Okay. Ms. Dawn.
Yes, I move that we approve the consent agenda as submitted.
Second.
Roll call.
Ms. Dawn.
Yes.
Mr. Jaramillo.
Aye.
Ms. Quintero.
Aye.
Mr. Crouch.
Aye. Motion passes. Next item on the agenda is general functions, autism program support.
Do we want to do the superintendent's report? I'm sorry.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I thought that. Dr. Favela, please. Sorry about skipping over you.
Put me in, coach.
Thank you, Mr. Crouch. Governing board members and members of the audience. Thank you for allowing me to fill in for Mr. Holmes today, superintendent's report and all. A Desert View to help us celebrate our partnership with the University of Arizona to improve the educational, economic, and healthcare outcomes of the Hispanic community in southern Arizona. In his remarks, President Robbins, a strong champion of the College Academy for Parents, pledged his continued support for the program. So, great. That's the end of the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Favela, and I do apologize for trying to skip
No.
over you there. It wasn't intentional.
No worries.
Now moving on to the general functions, the autism program support, and I believe Dr. Williams is presenting.
Good evening. Thank you, President Crouch, board members, and members of the audience. Thank you so much. I like to drive. I appreciate it. So I appreciate this opportunity to present to you all about our autism programs, but also when, in reviewing Mr. Hernandez's request, ask also a little bit of information about our programs. So I'm going to start with that and then talk about how we also provide services to our students who have been identified as children with autism in the district. But much of what you'll learn and that I'll share with you, just keep in mind that many of the same services and sort of the continuum of education that we provide, it really does benefit all children with disabilities depending on the severity. And ideally, what we want to look at is that for children with individual education plans, we're very focused on what their specific needs might be related to their educational journey with us. So first of all, just as a little reminder that students with who are identified as having a disabilities they might have a disability, but it really comes down to whether or not they need support in an educational environment, because sometimes we can have a disability, and it's really about, and that's one of the key questions we have to ask in eligibility is, does that disability impact their ability to access the curriculum, the ability to learn, and to be successful in the educational environment? So right out of the Individuals with Disabilities Act, they actually specify that a disability must cause the child the need for special education and related services in order to access the curriculum. And once before when I presented, I did share with you, these are the disability categories that students can be eligible for in Arizona and typically across the United States. It's very similar. And that we serve students between the ages of 3 through 21. And typically the students who are in school with us when they turn 21, so for instance, if you have a student right now who turns 21, it's not like we stop the services. They continue that year. We complete to ensure to support them and help them transition. So this is really paramount in everything that we do in special education is that the law is really based in about the least restrictive environment. And whenever possible, that's what we want to ensure is that children with disabilities are educated with their peers and that they have exposure to that same curriculum and grade level opportunities. And again, there's a big component about that access to education and activities with non-disabled peers. You've probably read or seen various articles or just research out there that talks about the benefits of children being educated with general ed peers just because of the rich language and experiences and so forth. And they both are good models for each other. So when we make decisions about students, it's very clear in the law that it talks about whenever possible and to the maximum extent appropriate, we want to ensure that we've considered first what that least restrictive environment might be. Now for some students, and as we'll go over the continuum in just a second, that might be the gen ed classroom. But for a student who's really struggling with lots of sensory or maybe just can't function in a classroom where there might be 20 or 30 students perhaps, and they need something that is maybe has less distractors, then maybe being in a small special classroom might be the least restrictive for that particular child. So again, it's just keeping in mind that for every student it is individualized. So the continuum of placement that is also spelled out in the law for us really are these areas. So the regular classroom, so that's the general ed setting where all students are educated, and then what those services might look like. Special ed classes that are specific, special schools. So for instance, many of you might be familiar or know our LifeShare program here in Sunnyside. That is a company that we contract with and work very closely with, and they provide a special school for students who require a program that focuses on interventions related to behavioral needs and so forth. So, and that's what we considered our, typically it's a day program or a program for our students with emotional disability type program, or even day programs that are servicing students with autism who have extreme behaviors but may be nonverbal and need just a different support system. Home instruction are for those students who become ill throughout the school year. So we do have students who first of all, you have students with disabilities who become ill for whatever reason, and they cannot, a doctor has determined that they cannot be in school, or they'll be out of school for an extended period of time, typically 3 months. So for those students, I have to ensure that we do provide homebound services where teachers then go to the home and meet with the students to ensure that they're still receiving their educational services. This also is a service that is for students who are not special ed, so general ed students who all of a sudden become ill for whatever reason, then, and they need to be out of school for a period of time, then we kick in that same process that we do for students and begin that eligibility process. Perhaps, maybe they need special ed, maybe they just need 504, but we still provide those services with a teacher to be in their home to provide them their educational support. And then finally, hospitals and institutions. So I think that pretty much speaks for itself. Institutions could be also residential placements that students might have been placed in.
Dr. Williams?
Sure.
Mr. Hallmill?
Yes.
On the special classes, what would that include? Would that be life skills included in that as well?
Yes, so our life skills programs, and in a moment, I'll also give you a breakdown of what schools and what programs we do have, but you're absolutely right. And typically, our programs for students with intellectual disabilities are often what we refer to as our life skills programs.
Okay, thank you.
Nope, great. And feel free to stop me anytime. That's
No problem. Thank you.
So actually, this next slide does break down. So right now, you can see that each of the schools, and so under autism, for instance, we have a continuum of services that start at Mission Manor, that's our elementary programs. Then you go into our middle school program, which is Apollo, and then Sunnyside High School has basically our strand of programs geared towards children who required a more, a self-contained classroom setting for children with autism. And then you can see each of the other areas that we focus on. We have special classrooms for students with emotional disabilities in each of the schools. Then those children with mild intellectual disabilities, as well as moderate and multiple disabilities. And then my mistake under preschool severe disabilities would be Ocotillo. So I forgot to. No matter how many times you look at the slide, you always find one thing you've missed. So this is, for the most part, our programs are geared towards a feeder pattern because we want as much as possible for students to be able to move through the schools and be with peers who would normally they would be going to school with. In some situations, that's not quite the case just because of how many are the number of students in those programs. I will say specifically for the program for children with autism, those, as you see, are, because of course you don't have, some of these students would probably go to Desert View High School, but if they still need a specials program, we have just the program that goes through Apollo and Sunnyside High School. And even at the elementary level, because we really put a lot of emphasis this last year and a half on the autism program, because we have an inclusion model there as well as the specialized classrooms. So ideally, we want students who are fully included to be in their home schools, but we have a support system there that really seems to work for them well. And also the staff has all been trained, as well as the gen ed staff have been very supportive in serving students in their programs, as well as the principal for that matter. He's been a real advocate, Mr. Huey, for our autism program at Mission Manor and really helping us build some of the systems that we have in place. This next slide is a little bit hard to see, but I just wanted to give you a breakdown. So hopefully you all have hard copy, and if not, I can make sure you have this. Is that this is just really kind of gives you a breakdown of how our services or the level of support that we provide for students. So for instance, it has a list of all the disability categories that you have, from developmental delay to emotional disability, hearing impairment, and a breakdown of, the number of students that we have. In the first column, which is a level A, that means that those are students who are typically in the general ed. So they spend approximately 80% of their time with gen ed peers. So meaning they're in the least restrictive when we think of it in that terms and being educated with their peers. And that's where we see the majority of our students. Level B is just slightly less, is that they might receive pull-out services. So if you've heard especially at the elementary level, we hear that more, where they receive resource support. And students are pulled out maybe a couple of hours throughout the week. So their actual time removed from the general population is about 60% of their time is with the gen ed, and the other part is being pulled out for specialized instruction with a teacher who's certified as a special ed teacher. And then level B, of course, is more restrictive in the fact that level B are those students who, level C are less than 60%, and that's what I would consider those programs that we just listed on the other page, like for their special classrooms. And they have opportunities to mainstream, but it's probably less than 60% of their time. So they're out maybe for specials, or maybe they might go out for an English or ELA class or a math class or a science class, or maybe it's just appropriate that they might be going to art or music and those kinds of things. And then, of course, when we think about lunchtime and recess time, that's a critical period as well. And then level D is actually what I would consider a special day school, or like our LifeShare and EDP program. And then, of course, it goes to homebound and then our preschool program, so where we have even fewer students. So as I was thinking about this, and just to further emphasize that continuum of services that we provide for students, and so just keeping in mind all of the students with disabilities, but even when you're thinking about children with autism, because I know a lot of times, people are always curious about inclusive models and what those programs might look like and how we serve students. So this is just to really reiterate that continuum, that really when we think about least restrictive for the most part, that means that they're in that setting where they're exposed to the general population, and that's where the majority of the students are being educated in. So that's, of course, the general education setting. And then as you move to the right for each of the boxes, of course, it outlines those same classes, those special classes that I mentioned. So whether it's a special class, a special school, homebound services, or a hospital and institution. Now, the thing to keep in mind for children with disabilities, and depending on the severity and their needs, they can move on this continuum throughout their education. So you might have a child who is in actually a special school or a self-contained program who, as they develop the skills and they're able to manage being into a large classroom, could move into the gen ed population. We have that happen quite frequently. Ideally, that's what we want. The expectation is that we really want the students to be in the gen ed population as frequently as possible.
Dr. Williams, how often are the students evaluated on that? Is it just kind of a informal evaluation that goes on all the time, or is there a formal evaluation to find out where they should be in the program?
So yes, there is a formal evaluation. So it actually begins with that initial evaluation that has to be done by a school psychologist and perhaps a team of other specialists who will be doing assessments depending on what sort of concerns that the school site might have. So our school psychologists are really critical and key in that decision-making process. So with all the work, and especially the work that we're doing under Superintendent Holmes' guidance related to tiered intervention and teacher assistant teams, that's where you begin to collect data about students and their performance. So if you have students who are struggling and they've collected data over time, that school psych would be involved, and then they actually will start that process for an initial evaluation. They might include a speech pathologist, they might include an occupational therapist or a physical therapist, or even if we have a child with a hearing impairment, we might invite our colleagues from the Southwest Regional Co-op, who they provide our services for our students with hearing impairment and visual impairments. So they would all come together to do a full evaluation. Once the evaluation is done, they determine eligibility. So once a child has been determined eligible, every 3 years they review and come together to do a complete review of the student's records. Now it might entail another complete evaluation, or it might just be a sort of a subset or collection of data. But every 3 years the law does require that you go back and review a student's eligibility criteria as it relates to their disability. And then, of course, every year they have to develop an individual education plan for each student with a disability. So the only other thing on this slide, it just really the bottom blue boxes just speak to out-of-class support, which might be for a student who is in the gen ed, but the special ed teacher consults with the gen ed teachers on how to accommodate, how to support a particular students, or maybe an occupational therapist might do that. And then as you move across, that means the student really receives more services from especially in our middle schools and our high schools where we have more co-teaching going on, so a teacher may be in there co-teaching with the gen ed teacher. And then, of course, the resource room or self-contained programs, as I mentioned earlier. So this is just a really high-level slide that talks to the model in our curriculum. So what's most important that I think has been a real transition in the last, 10 years, especially with all the work done with state standards. Historically, we had alternate standards for students who are much more involved, and there was always this discussion about making sure students have access to grade level standards. So all the work we do for all our programs and the education that's provided has to be aligned, or at least there's a progression to the grade level standards. So you wouldn't want to have a student who is in high school, let's say, who might have an intellectual disability, and maybe they are reading at a 3rd or 4th grade level, but you wouldn't provide them curriculum or materials from the 3rd or 4th grade level. We would want to do age-appropriate curriculum and instruction that's tied to the grade level standards. So that's a big piece of, and that's why I make that comment of content alignment. But with that, it requires that we ensure that accommodations are provided to students as needed. So if you have a student who struggles with reading, that maybe in the classroom they could use a voice output so that it reads the text to them, so that they're not having to spend time struggling trying to read through materials during the class time. And that might be a skill that they work on when they're working with a special ed teacher, maybe in a resource setting or another setting. For our students in our life skills program across the district, this has been something that Sunnyside has been using for some time now, and will continue to do that. We're just really trying to make a much more purposeful rationale, or at least insisting that teachers use the unique curriculum. While we try not to always identify a particular curriculum, but this one does look at grade level standards, but the activities and the lessons developed are appropriate for the students who might be in the life skills programs. So we've been really working across many of our classrooms as teachers are implementing it, but we continue to do training so that we can use it with fidelity to continue to support that. And it also builds not only on academics, because that's an important piece, but academics and how they use it in life skill settings. Assistive technology, you might remember last year when I did the presentation about just where we are in special ed, and one of the initiatives that we wanted to focus on was bringing an AT team together, which we did. They've been together for a year, and it was funded through a grant by the Arizona Department of Ed when it came on board that we had applied for. And that helped really provide the training for this assistive tech team. So it's a team of specialists who can go out to our sites and do training with our teachers and staff on what kinds of assistive technology can you use. It could be something with an app on their computer to a low-tech like a pencil grip. So what kinds of things that students could benefit from. On this team, it also includes a speech pathologist, an occupational therapist, a gen ed, and as well as a special ed teacher, 2 special ed teachers. And they also focus on communication devices as well. We have students who are nonverbal, and so that's one of the areas that I just feel strongly about, that we have to ensure children have a way to communicate, and we have to start early on. And the more that we do that, as their language becomes more complex, and whatever system we use, whether it's a device, will really help them access the curriculum and their learning. And we're actually finding that to be true with some of our students that we've done a real focus look at. Then, of course, we have our transition and school to work, and that's really a big piece of what we do in the high school. Not only if we're in those life skills programs are we looking at some of those academics, but it's about how they develop and use skills across settings. And that includes that preparation from school to work, or maybe a school to training program, because as we think about when they leave our system. And then finally, we have our instructional staff and our support staff, where in the last 2 years we've really been putting an emphasis on the types of training that we provide for them. So as you remember, last year we talked about, we changed the roles of our our assistants, the special ed aides in the classrooms, to become personal care assistants. And that was quite the journey that, thank goodness to Dr. Bergman and working with me. But we really wanted to specialize and really focus on what they do besides providing support. But they also provide support for students who might need help with hygiene or feeding, or a child who has some real behaviors. So with that, it really came the need to do some training around how to help them better interact with students and have the skill sets on how do we just de-escalate behaviors and that type of thing. So we've done quite a bit of training with that. And again, with our partnership with the staff from LifeShare, they offer free training that we schedule during the back-to-school events and then throughout the year for our assistants, but also for our staff and our programs for autism and emotional disability. So I love this slide because I think children with autism are unique and they are mysterious. And with their disability, you have such a range of how they might act. No child really acts the same. Just because you have that label, sometimes we think that every child acts a certain way, but with children in general, that's not the case. But actually with children with autism, that's definitely the case. So autism is a developmental disability that results in delays and developmental differences, and especially in the areas of communication, social interaction, and behaviors. And that there's this persistent deficit around those social communication and social interaction. That's probably the number one thing you hear when someone describes someone with who has been diagnosed or found eligible to be on the autism spectrum. They also exhibit what we typically see as sort of repetitive behaviors that really are embedded in patterns of behaviors, interests. So they might have something that they just really fixate on. Maybe it's an object or colors or anything like that, sound, as well as activities. And often have difficulty with changes in routines, and highly focused on maybe, like I said, particular objects or colors or sounds or things like that, and need for sensory input. So we really work very closely with a really a cohesive team with an occupational therapist and physical therapist to really help us ensure that we provide that sensory diet for the students who require it. So at our program in Mission Manor, if you go out there, and especially, or also at Apollo as well as Sunnyside High School, it's real important that we have a sensory room. So we have an area where students, if they become stressed and they need that sort of sensory outlet, they can go back to that room and actually engage with other objects or sensory type tools that they have a preference for. I don't know if any of you follow sort of social media, but a few years ago there was something I think on Facebook, and this gentleman is an adult with autism, and he has those special gifts that when we talk about some of the special gifts that children or adults with autism have, and he actually went on a helicopter ride where they fly him over the city, and then he goes back from memory and does the sketch, and that's kind of what he's done here as well. So I just feel it's so important that, whenever we think of disabilities, we kind of describe them, but there are strengths that come with that, and that's what we need to really work and grow from. So if we can focus on the strengths that the children or these young adults have, that will help us better plan for their educational program. And so a lot of times what we see is strengths are embedded in long-term memory, that's a real strength for them, because a lot of times with children with disability, they really struggle with long-term memory. And so that is a strength for them. Often they have talents in math, computers, art, music. They have thinking in visual ways, hyperlexia, where a lot of times even young children can decode written language even though they do not yet understand it. So, which is, quite interesting, especially as an educator when you're working with children to help them engage with written text. Often punctual, honest, and detail-oriented. So some of the skills that I think can be really powerful when you think about planning a student's. And those are only just a few. I just wanted to highlight some of those so that you would at least have that to think about. Provided a little bit of information just on research. I won't go into too much detail here, but we do know that the number of children who are being identified as having autism has really increased. So we went from actually, when they quoted 10,000, 1 in 10,000 in 1989 to right now, we're at about 1 to 60 children are identified as having autism. Now, I will tell you there's lots of things in the media, and in fact, the last bullet also talks about there's been a number of studies that are done because people have tied it to, is it vaccine, and just a variety of different things and stuff. And so those things have been determined that those really aren't the link. It might be that maybe we're just better at evaluating students. It could be a variety of different things, and that evaluation piece is critical. So given that this research exists and what we know about children coming to our programs, I really felt that it was critical that we develop an autism team. So we have a team of a school psychologist, speech pathologist, and a lead teacher for autism at Mission Manor. And the three of them have, we've sent them to training so that they have that skill set to administer the types of instruments used to better determine if children truly have autism. Too often, we find is that outside programs and medical sort of, and nothing against doctors, but, they'll make a determination that it's autism, but we have to make sure, is it truly something that is an eligibility under an educational model? And so that's why we needed to ensure that we had this team. So with that, any other questions?
Dr. Williams, more of an observation than a question. To me, this highlighted that the children with autism and other special needs really are to me, an indicator that we need to treat all children individually. That even though other children may not exhibit the extreme, that all of them have they're individuals. They're not a simple number. We can't treat them all the same. And I think this is kind of a leading indicator on where we need to go with education. And I really applaud what you've done at the special ed department and our exceptional ed.
Oh, well,
And so I think it's something we shouldn't lose sight of, though, in the regular classrooms, that children aren't just numbers. We don't just process them through the machine and end up with a product at the end.
right. And I appreciate that you made that comment, because I would agree with you that, we all learn and think a little bit differently, and sometimes we need a different, way of having that information presented to them. So, and even with our AT team, that team is, while their priority is to work with our students with disabilities, but if we have a general ed student who is really struggling with something and they need some sort of assistive technology or just access, because we are a tech district, there are so many tools that students find really useful. Did I put that on my timer? Am I on a timer? I promised them I would talk fast.
Any other questions from the board, or
Sorry.
Ms. Quintero?
That's okay. I don't know if you can answer this or not, but how do we get all our kids to school if they're like out of district or they're not near Mission Manor, is that a bus question?
Well, I can answer it. I don't know if Mr. Valdez is here, but, so I'll just go ahead and answer that one. So for students within our boundaries, we definitely provide transportation. And I know we have situations where students might be in a homeless situation, and some of them are students with disabilities, that we do make arrangements for transportation so that we can get them to school. Typically, our students who come to us from open enrollment, because we have accepted students on open enrollment, the parents often transport them, because then our buses don't typically go outside the boundaries. So, yeah, to answer your question.
We don't have any problems with any,
No, we haven't.
Okay,
You know,
good.
like I said, across our continuum of services, we have, you know, a handful, or maybe a bit more than a handful of students who have come to us through open enrollment. I will tell you that we always want to evaluate and give every student an opportunity to come. Sometimes I have to be, you know, a little protective when we look at our numbers, especially for our special programs, because I do want to make sure that we have the services for our students within the district. So there might be times that we can't accept a student into our special ed programs. But we will review it each year, because as numbers change, we want to make sure we give students with disabilities the opportunity to come to Sunnyside, because we're pretty awesome. Just as a whole, right?
thank you.
Ms. Dawn?
Just a couple of real quick questions here. I was very pleasantly surprised that we had such a low number of TBI students here because of all the different, you know, the TBI has risen throughout the years. And, you know, there's so many things that now cause TBIs besides the regular motorcycles and falling from cliffs kind of thing.
Yeah, right.
But, you know, the football stuff that we have now going and stuff like that. And we have a lot of training on TBI because there's such a large number generally. So surprised we only have 3
Yeah.
that
So-
are labeled
Right.
TBI in the district.
So, let me just provide a little clarification on the TBI, because you're right. We actually have more than just the 3. But at this point, the students that we know of that have that TBI, and for those of you, that's traumatic brain injury. And we've done a lot because Ms. Dong has also shared some presentation with some psychologists through various agencies that we've had our psychologists work with. So what happens is that a child or a student might be identified with a TBI because, like you said, there was an injury that happened at some point in their education. And what we typically do is, once they've been identified, that when we get to that next 3 year, if the team reviews and evaluates that student again, their disability category may change. So which happens as well. That maybe now we've discovered that maybe the student really has now, because of the TBI injury, an emotional disability. So they have real struggles with their behaviors and being able to control those or self-regulate. So then we might go with more appropriate label of emotional disabilities. Or maybe it's a learning disability. So that's typically what happens.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Okay, how many homebound teachers do we have?
It varies. So basically, the way we do this is that on staff, we have one who is, who I would consider full-time, that goes out to families and, or to homes and work with students. When we have a student who needs homebound services, we make that available to teachers who are interested in working after hours. So then we just pay them for those hours beyond their school day. Hence, Mr. Encinas gets lots of pars from me and addendums. But I would say right now, we have, I want to say, 10 teachers who at any given time go out and support a student. And typically, homebound services is up to about 4 hours a week. It's not a whole lot, but it's really going in, and, you know, we hope also that, you know, the regular ed teachers are sending work, and so then the homebound teacher just checks in, you know, if the student needs assistance or support.
And sometimes that homebound student, that's all they can do is those 4 hours of school
Yeah.
because of their energy levels or whatever
Right.
other issues that might be involved. But I'm really glad to hear that it's our teachers that are given the opportunity to, you know, go away and after school, and because they're the ones that are in the school, knowing what is happening, knowing what the curriculum is all about, knowing what is expected.
Right.
And so it's so much better for them. They know the district, and it's much better to get them to do this, and it also helps them financially. So I'm glad
Sure, it's
to
little.
hear that we're doing that. That's great.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Hart?
Mr. Encinas.
I'm also really happy to hear about the way you have the special classrooms and, you know, like the autism at Mission Manor and then to Apollo and to Sunnyside. Because at the end of the day, you know, it's very difficult to learn how to work with all the different disabilities. But if you can work with certain disabilities and gather enough experience and the tools that you need, it's so much better for the student. There is somebody that is qualified to work with people with learning disabilities of certain types of autism, of different, spectrums. And because there's, especially like autism, it's so different. Every child is so different as far as how it affects that child. Just like a TBI. Every TBI is so different from every other TBI. Every autistic child and a child that's on the spectrum is so different from one another as far as what is going on. And yet the teachers can learn all the different tools and what triggers what and what helps and what are some of the good tools and ways to do things. And to know that it's happening at all the different levels, not just for autism, but what's happening for all the other disabilities too, what they do at Elvira and, all the other schools, for example. I really like that system. I think it's probably the best. I do also agree and believe that if a child is with a cohort, it's so much better for them to continue up through high school with that same cohort. Because when you don't keep them with that cohort and they go to a different school, they don't see the people that they're used to. And the people aren't used to them. And what their needs are. The students aren't used to them and what their needs are. But if the student has been with this child from Mission Manor and goes to Apollo, they know each other. Goes to Sunnyside, they know each other. And the student with a disability knows that also. I know my grandson has Asperger's, and did fantastic at Liberty. Fantastic. His first year at Lawfer was very difficult because he went there instead of to Apollo. So most of his classmates were not there. His cohort was not there.
Yeah, that's true.
And the other students didn't understand him and what was going on, so they would tease him. And it made his life miserable. And the teachers didn't understand what to do, so they didn't help matters either. So it took a while for everybody to sit down and talk about what was going on. And finally, everybody adjusted, and he did well. But I think that if he had gone to Apollo, even though his dad was teaching at Lawfer, I think for him, because of his disability, it would have probably been better. But at the end of the day, Lawfer turned out to really step up and provide an excellent education.
Right. And, I have to say, I think because across our district, while we have sort of that continuum of those cohorts like that, we do have sprinkling of students who, are on the autism spectrum disorder and even some of the other disabilities that are in some of our schools in a much more included setting. So for me, it's been a real pleasure because I know across the district, the principals have been just really great and stuff. And so when we need to get in there to support them or their teachers, or if we, need to have a conversation about sensitivity or things like that, we do partner on that, so.
Right, yeah. We have an excellent special ed staff throughout the district. I'm really proud of what we do here at Sunnyside. I have, been very proud for years. And, you're coming into the district with all your knowledge of all the things that schools are doing throughout the state. I think has really enhanced, what we are doing here. And so I appreciate that, and I appreciate all the programs that you put into place and the things. The grants.
Oh, yeah, we're going to try and get.
The grants that you're bringing in, the special needs grants and things. And so thank you so much also for you and for all of your staff.
Thank you.
And for what they do for us in our district.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Mr. Hamill?
Dr. Williams, how is the parent involvement?
That's a critical piece. So just from the law, it's very clear that the parent is a member of the IEP team, so that individual education plan. So that, and in fact, this last year, when we did a lot of our training on compliance, just reminding, staff of, those timelines, and that we ensure we give parents the opportunity to come to meetings and not wait until the last minute, those kinds of things, and making sure we're planning, because parents work, and sometimes, trying to come into the school during the daytime for a meeting can be really tough. So really want to be sensitive to that, but it's just critically important that the parent is a partner in this. And last year, we actually, began trying to do some parent workshops, and we keep doing that. We have had one this year, and I hope that attendance will continue to improve, and, I appreciate having some of the dates listed on our calendars, so that at those meetings, parents can learn about their role and their rights, and also understanding the IEP process. Our next one is coming up in November, where they can learn about when your child turns 18, because we have to train all our high school staff that at 18, who really has the role, because now the law says we really just invite the student, but as a
Right.
courtesy, I always tell them that, please make sure you're including the parent in that conversation.
And some of the students know that. the
Yes,
same time.
yes. And I will say, we have had a couple
they're
of
pretty
occasions where the
smart.
student has said that they didn't want the parent when they're
they-
18. That makes it
story.
tricky.
Yes.
But yes, it's a big part of that partnership and ensuring that we are serving the student and have that relationship with, and especially with the home with students that are, have more significant disabilities, because a lot of times our families are connected to outside agencies. So we want to make sure that there is sort of a connection of what those services look like. While education and home looks different, but some of the interventions can cross over.
Good, good. And then one of the best presentations that we had at the law conference was with a gentleman that shared his life story with his son, which had autism. And it was just amazing, to say the least, and what that young man had accomplished. And,
Well,
yeah.
And that's what it's all about, because,
Yes.
I mean, I think, like we want, and you were saying earlier, Mr. Crouch, that, we treat children as individuals, but we have to also maintain high expectations. And that, if we really take that team approach and look at their strengths and build on that, we know that students with disabilities can be very successful and can have independent lives and, just do all the things that we want any young adult to be able to do.
Right. Thank you, Dr.
You're
Wentz.
welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr.
All
Williams.
right, thank you very much for your time.
Next item on the agenda is the 2017-18 Annual Financial Report Update. Mr. Encinas?
Board members. At the October 2nd special board meeting, the governing board did approve the annual financial report for FY 17-18, and I appreciate and give my thanks to the governing board for having done that on October 2nd. Unfortunately, it was an early morning meeting, and the purpose of the meeting was strictly to approve the AFR to meet the requirement that it be submitted to ADE by no later than October 15th. We have had a meeting since October 2nd, so we met that requirement, so the AFR was filed with ADE and has been accepted. And I think at that time, I would have liked to have gone into more detail into exactly what the report included, and I'd like to report, first of all, that the annual financial report for the past year, FY 17-18, does reflect that we had all our expenses within budget limits. We did not exceed any of the budget limits that were imposed by the state on us. So that's the good news. Some more good news is the fact that our budget balance carry forward increased from the prior year, and in both the M&O and the capital outlay. It has been normal practice that when we present the AFR to the governing board, to the community, that we show some trends in regards to what has happened since 2010, and that's when we started. And as you can see, I've attached a lot of spreadsheets that Ms. Brenda Maloney is responsible and to be blamed for. No, I'm not kidding. No, she deserves all the credit in regards to having that information in spreadsheets that are updated and maintained on an annual basis. That'll give us a good historical record of what we've experienced. As you can see, one of the first things we see is ADM. Back in 2010, we had over 16,000 students, and we saw an increase to it the following year. But since 2010, 11, 12, we had a decrease of almost 1,000 kids. We had a recovery of about 600 kids for 2 years, and then the dramatic decrease the past 3 years, from 2015, 16, and 17. Almost over 1,000 kids. So that's one of the things that we're fortunate this year that it appears that we've hit a level, and we leveled our ADM. The kindergarten class has stabilized at around 1,100 kids, and that's what the big drop was we saw. So the good thing that we see now, that we do have a stabilization in our ADM. Our M&O in turn, and when you have kids, you have a budget that's built on those number of students, and as you can see, back in 2008, we had a budget of over $96 million, down to a budget of $84 million last year. A decrease of over $13 million in budget, and correspondingly in expenses. So we've been fortunate enough that we've had the leadership from the governing board to the superintendent and to our staff, our employees who have been very understanding in regards to the decrease in our revenues, that we've been able to work with them and be able to provide services with the limited resources that we've had over the past 10 years. So it shows there basically the decrease in our budget. The override here, at one time we provided more than $8 million of additional revenues, and we started seeing a decrease in 2012 and down to zero beginning in 2015. So we've had no override since 2015, and that's been a big deficit in our part in regards to not having that amount of resources that almost all of the school districts in Pima County have, and the state of Arizona have an override in their budget. We're one of very few. In Pima County, I think we're one of three. Ajo, who doesn't override, and TUSD, but they got DSEG. So our budget balance carry forward, as you can see there, we've had a budget, which is the unspent balance of the budget that is carried forward to the following year. And in 2008, we had a little over $1.3 million. And since Dr. Favela was the interim superintendent and Mr. Holmes has been the superintendent, we've seen a constant increase in the budget balance carry forward amount that has resulted in as a result of some tightening of belt, some efficiency improvements, and a commitment by the superintendent and the governing board that they want to see at least a 4% budget balance carry forward in the event that we have a rainy day fund, in essence. What happens? And I foresee one very soon, the compression issue, where we'll have to dip into the budget balance carry forward to address the compression issue that we're faced with in 2020, where the minimum wage goes up to $12 an hour.
And Mr. Martinez, could you just give just a brief explanation of what that compression effect is?
Basically, compression is when your existing salary schedule does not keep up the pace of either mandated or market rates in the economy. Mandated increases are the minimum wage, where we had a minimum wage of $8.65 3 years ago, now going to over $12 an hour in a year from now, a year from this January. $11 this coming January. So almost a 40% increase in minimum wage over a 3-year period. However, our salary schedule does not take into account that increase in the minimum wage, where existing employees are stuck in a pay scale that is not adjusted for, and for that market rate adjustment that's mandated to us. So we have to, in essence, what's happening, we might have a brand new employee who's going to be making $11 an hour January, and an employee who's been with us for 10 years is making $11 an hour also, because that's where they are right now. So that's when the problem that we're faced with, of having to address that inequity and really unfairness to continued employees.
So it affects not only the level of the employee that's below the minimum wage.
Right.
It affects all the employees.
Everybody else.
That's above.
All the way across.
Here.
Yeah. So, next spreadsheet basically is a comparison of the budget to the annual expenditures. It shows basically the budget balance carry forward. Unrestricted capital, see some light at the end of the tunnel this recent year with the increase to the district additional assistance increase this past year. We'll see the capital outlay hopefully increase to a point where we had it at one time. Soft capital, there's nothing. We haven't had any soft capital money since 2013. And that, again, the district additional assistance is trying to adjust or account for that decrease and make up for that. And then lastly here, basically, is the Instructional Improvement Fund, which is what is commonly known as Indian gaming funds, where casino monies are distributed to all school districts in the state of Arizona. We've received around $800,000, And that's been pretty consistent over the past 4 years. And we do have a cash balance carry forward from that amount that will be added to this coming year's revenues. The other spreadsheets that I think I would like to bring to your attention and make some clarification, because Mr. Holmes did have a question regarding why this increase here. If you see a big increase, see this black area of $1.8 billion, how do I increase this? That's good enough again. If you see it under student support, students, there was a decrease from 2010 to 2018 of over $2 million under student support, but then there's an increase of almost $1.9 million under support general administration of over the same time frame. That is because of coding. I mean, different coding area where we were required to change the coding. What used to be coded to student support services for students is now being coded to general services, general administration. Okay, that's the primary reason for that apparent, decrease in students and increase in administration. But it's entirely a coding issue, where we're coding the salaries and expenditures of personnel in those areas that were formerly considered support students are now considered support general administration. Okay. And then,
Mr. Sneeds, could you give us an example of some of those classifications?
for instance, under curriculum, all the curriculum support specialists before were considered student support. Now that they report to the director of chief academic officer, Pam Benton, it's considered general administration because they work for her. Okay.
Thank you.
Let's see, another highlighted area here basically would be, right here, special ed. If you look at special ed this past year, we spent almost $1 million more in special ed instruction than we did in 2016-17. And overall, in special education, we spent more than $1.4 million more this past year than we did the year before. So, again, services that are being required to be provided to the students, Sunnyside's providing them, no doubt about it. So they can't say we're not putting our money where it's needed. So, and then, let's see. In regards to how we're spending our money in the various areas, either by program, we're spending in 17-18, last year we spent 76% of our M&O budget under regular ed, 90 for special ed, 4 for transportation, and virtually zero for these two areas. Compared that to the prior year where it was 16 for special education, 79 for regular ed, 1% for K-3 reading, and 4% for transportation has been consistent. So, again, a lot of information. You're going to go over it. If you have any questions, I would be more than happy to bring back the item for more discussion with the governing board.
Mr. Hamil?
I have a question. Do the business or industries in our area, what type of educational tax is there?
Educational
Tax
Tax?
for the businesses and industries that are around the district?
Well, if they're on private property, taxable private property, they pay the normal tax, whatever tax rate it is. But if you're, like, for instance, the buildings that are owned by the Air Force, by the Raytheon leases, they don't pay
None.
one penny worth of tax. If you're property owned by the Airport Authority, not one
None.
penny worth of tax.
So we could very well be the richest
We could have
district
been,
in-
yeah,
in-
but I always make this
They pay
comparison.
tax, yeah.
Amfi School District, compared to us, we're similar size.
Right.
Their assessed valuation is $1.4 billion. Ours is $426 million. So, their tax, they can generate a lot more taxes and have a lower tax rate than we can. So, some more bonds too. All right,
Any other questions? Mr. Encinas, thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Next on the agenda is consideration and possible adoption of a resolution providing for all matters relating to the sale and issuance of school improvement bonds of the district, including delegation of the to the superintendent and chief financial officer of the district to determine certain matters related thereto. Mr. Encinas, you're up again.
Thank you, sir. Board members. Coming to the governing board for the last time in at least maybe 2 years in regards to selling some bonds. Or this will be the last time for this bond issue anyway, because this is the remaining authorization this district has from the voter-approved November 2011 election. Back in November 2011, they approved the sale of $88 million worth of district bonds to fund $32 million worth of remodel and renovation throughout the district, $23 million worth of technology, $10 million worth of athletics improvements, $12 million for a fine arts complex improvement, $6 million for transportation buses, and $1 million for security. Total was $88 million. And we've split, since 2012, we've sold $78.575 million. We have remaining $9.425 million, which we're coming to the governing board tonight for your approval to approve the resolution authorizing us to go out and sell these remaining bond funds. With us tonight is Ms. Erica Coombs from Stifel, our financial advisor, who has worked very closely with the district over the past 5 years or forever, really. And she's been our resource person in regards to relying on her expertise in the area of bond funds. So any questions you may have regarding the upcoming sale, Ms. Coombs would be more than happy to answer.
Mr. Hernandez.
Thank you, Mr. Encinas. Can you remind us of the balance that we have of unsold bonds, the allocation of the different categories? Because you mentioned the overall bucket, so building the new school, athletics facilities, technology. Can you remind us of the 9.425?
How much is going to go to the remaining?
Yeah.
Approximately $3.4 million will be for remodel and renovation, $2.9 million for technology.
Okay.
I think it's, let me give you the exact amounts. Hold on.
Sorry for delaying.
No problem, no problem. It is. Oops. $3.4 for remodel renovation, 2.8 for athletics, 2.8 for technology, and 0.8 for fine arts. That's 9.8. The other 0.4 is coming from the remaining cash balance. So of the $78 million we sold, we have about $400,000 of unobligated, unencumbered bond funds. So $400,000 plus the 9.42 will be 9.8. Of the 9.8, we can earmark 3.4 to remodeling, 2.8 for athletics, 2.8 for technology, and 0.8 for fine arts.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions from the board?
Just real
Miss-
quick. So nothing left for buses?
Well, no, I think Ms. Coombs can speak to that because of the $9.4 million that of bonds that are remaining. My understanding is we can use 10% of that
Yes, that is
for
correct.
anything else.
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
So up to $942,500.
Or it would be over if you had any funds left,
Mhm.
it would be 10% of this full 88 million, but if it's already been spent, but it could be 10% of what's left to be spent. Yeah, because we're at the last sale,
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions from
Mr. Crum?
Ms. Dong?
I'd like to move that we approve the resolution as presented.
Second.
Roll call?
Ms. Strong?
Yes.
Mr. Hernandez?
Aye.
Mr. O'Neill? Ms. Quintero?
Aye.
Mr. Carter?
Aye, motion passes. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Mr.
We're very
Encinas.
grateful
Thank
to
you.
be working with you.
Next item on the agenda is policy IHB, Special Instruction Programs. Dr. Favela?
Thank you, Mr. Crouch, governing board members and members of the audience. As you know, Arizona School Board Association sends out policy advisories when there are changes in a policy or new legislation. In this case, a special policy advisory was sent out by ASBA that reflects adjusted language in the Arizona Administrative Code with regard to special education standards. And so what this means is that last year, the Arizona School Board of Education adopted some rules in the area of special education, and that affects policy IHB. The substance of the policy has not really changed, but the language has been adjusted to also align with the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA. And so Dr. Williams has had a chance to review it, the policy, and along with the regulation and exhibit, and has concurred that there really isn't anything substantial, but clarifies many things. And many of the things that Dr. Williams talked about today regarding IEPs and communicating to parents, their referrals, all of that is reflected in the language, and that was given to you. The blue is the added language, and the red language was the deleted. And so the exceptional ed department at Arizona Department of Ed is requiring now that school districts submit the certification form by November 1st. And so because we are not, our schedule of board meetings will not fall before then, we needed to expedite the completion of that form. And so that's why this action item is a two-part motion. I wanted to point out that you have a couple of policies. You have policy BGF, which authorizes the governing board to suspend or repeal a policy. And that's what we're going to incorporate today. And then BGB is policy adoption. Normally, the normal way that we bring policies forward is bring them in for first reading, and then for second reading, and sometimes even third if it's something that's a complex issue. And so this is what we're asking the governing board to act on today, is to implement policy BGF and suspend policy BGB temporarily. So for the policy adoption, you're going to be authorized to use policy BGF in order to suspend to this policy adoption policy just temporarily for this agenda item. Sounds kind of complicated, but you're invoking those two policies. And then the second motion for your consideration would be to approve the actual policy advisory. The actual regulation and the exhibits don't necessarily, according to policy, require board approval, but those are considered within superintendent authorization as well. So.
And
if
so
you
we
have
should
any-
make two separate motions as well.
Yes, sir. So if you have any questions about the actual language of the policy, I'm happy to do that. Otherwise, just requesting your consideration on this one.
Mr. Hamill? Oh, Ms. Dawn?
Okay, I'd like to move that we implement policy BGF and suspend policy BGB, policy adoption, for this agenda item only.
Second.
Roll call?
Ms. Dawn?
Yes.
Mr. Hernandez?
Aye.
Mr. Jaramillo?
Aye.
Ms. Quintero?
Aye.
Mr. Crouch?
Aye, motion passes. Ms. Dawn?
I would like to move that we approve policy IHB, special instructional programs.
Second.
Roll call?
Ms. Dawn?
Yes.
Mr. Hernandez?
Aye.
Mr. Jaramillo?
Aye.
Ms. Quintero?
Aye.
Mr. Crouch?
Aye, motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Favela. Next item on the agenda is the Arizona School Board Association, ASBA bylaw change, proposal and consideration. This is a policy change or excuse me, a bylaw change for ASBA, that ASBA has requested that we consider as a school board. Right now, the present situation is that it's almost impossible to make a bylaw change with ASBA, because at least, or 50%, or the majority, excuse me, the majority of the school boards in the state of Arizona have to approve of the bylaw change. Well, unfortunately, the majority of boards don't actually vote on those changes, so we can't make bylaw changes. So what this change would do, would allow us to, do we have the actual language up there? Okay, so the, Proposal A is with an endorsement from ASBA Board of Directors and the ASBA Governance Committee. The ASBA Equity Committee proposes that the additional statement on equity be added to the ASBA core belief statement. I'm sorry. And Proposal B is that the ASBA Governance Committee recommends that a bylaw be amended or repealed by a majority affirmative vote of all member boards. Currently, it's a minimum of two-thirds, not the majority, I misstated that, of all ASBA member boards must vote in the affirmative to amend or repeal a bylaw. So, Ms. Dong?
Unless there aren't any questions, I think we've discussed it quite a bit with ASBA and the different meetings that we've had with them. And I think we're all in agreement with the need to add that extra language into the equity statement, and the need, if we're going to make any changes, to also agree with and to pursue Proposal B so that we can get some changes when we need them.
Yeah.
The problem wasn't so much that people didn't believe in the change, but people just weren't putting it onto their board agenda items, and they were not voting. And so we did not have enough people voting in order to get the two-thirds of the members to vote.
It was inaction.
It wasn't, yeah. So we'd like to go ahead and do that. And so at this point in time, I'd like to move that we approve the Arizona School Boards Association's proposal as submitted, or modified changes to be reflected as.
Second.
Roll call.
Ms. Dawn?
Yes.
Mr. Hernandez?
Aye.
Mr. Jaramillo?
Aye.
Ms. Quintero?
Aye.
Mr. Cook?
Aye, motion passes. Next item on the agenda is suggestion for future agenda items. Are there any suggestions for future agenda items from board members? Ms. Dawn?
To have one that, just to help me clarify some things and to see things all together, because we get a presentation here about this item, presentation there about that item, presentation. So I'd like to have one where it's just showing the last 5 years of the ADM that we've had, and we did a little bit of that today. Okay, so that's that one. Then the other day, we did the other ones. So I'd like to have the last 5 years of the ADM, the last 5 years of the graduation rates, and the last 5 years of the dropout rates. I want to have a presentation that will show us all three together at the same time. I just want to get a clearer picture. I think it's better if we don't have it like months apart.
Are there any other suggestions for future agenda items? We have no unfinished business. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Roll call.
Ms. Dawn?
Yes.
Mr. Hernandez?
Aye.
Mr. Jaramillo?
Aye.
Mr. Cook?
Aye, motion passes. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Boston was winning 5-3, bottom of the sixth.
Bottom what?
Bottom six?
5-3, bottom of 6, so it's still anybody's game.